Hey, Tim,
Well,
it's another Friday.
I'm really looking forward to our topic today. It's one that I have learned through both fire as well as grace. And I wanted to talk to you about a few things about it. But I want to share with you an experience I had with our topic today, and that's issues.
That's great. Risks and issues. Years ago, I remember thinking, well, what's the difference? For a long time, I never understood in my own mind when something was a risk and when something was an issue. Something as simple as that can trip you up. So maybe we can settle some clarity on that as well today.
Oh yeah, I guarantee that we'll be able to sneak that one in.
Yeah.
Let me give you a scenario. So here I am in a series of marketing campaigns for 4 or 5 products for the corporation. And we have a yearly conference where the corporation releases all its products. And we've been doing this 3 years in a row. And my director said, Tim, this is inconsequential. We don't have a lot to show this year, so back it down. Just don't bother me with anything. Don't bother me with it. And don't even consider this. Just manage it for me. And I don't want to even hear about it. And we'll just go in and go out. We'll do something interesting next year. And I say, okay. And I'm thinking to myself, well, how can we do this and how can we save money? And so there was another product we've been working with. The other product group had a very similar product. And so we decided to combine our footprint in the conference. And we were saving. And I went to my director and I said, here's what we're doing. He's, what? You gave away footprint on that? What was the matter with you? And all of a sudden, I hadn't realized that I missed the big picture of what issues really were. Issues were things that you don't know and you don't notice until they grab you and shake you by your throat. And the only thing I could have done was go against my director and actually keep him updated on the decisions I was making. This is the hard part of being a project manager. How do I keep track of these things as issues? Because the issues are not in my head. I can always figure a way out. The issues are in the head of my stakeholders, my team, and my sponsors. And I continue to struggle with this and scratch my head, even though my projects don't have such big failures as that did that year.
So if I heard you correctly, is it the fact that you took that particular action that created the issue? The issue had not been there prior to that? Is that what you're referring to?
Exactly. The issue was that I got rid of our real estate at the conference. And that was not what my director intended. He said we were going to have a low profile. We didn't want to make a big deal of it. And the problem was, the issue was my action to meet his expectations was the wrong action. And I created the issue.
I got it. So let me go back to what I come to originally in terms of, we project managers, and maybe I'm skipping ahead a little bit here, but in my mind, I want to bring this together while we have this conversation. But a lot of what we do as project managers is we tie ourselves to something we call risk management, or perhaps even issues management. The two are truly different.
Mhm.
How are they different in your mind as far as risks versus issues?
A risk is a prediction that something may occur. A risk is something that might occur. And if it occurs, will have an impact. And that impact can be positive or negative. It's a future event. An issue is here and now, and it's right in front of your desk, and you have to resolve it. There's an ethical need to say, I have to resolve this issue.
So that's the conclusion I came to as well. And after having studied this myself, because I was in my early days as a project manager, we were supposed to track risks and that sort of thing. I was confused in my own mind. And often a risk that is not attended to can become an issue.
Yes.
In this case, if it's not monitored and sort of followed along to see where it's progressing, it could result in an issue. And then you have a project impact.
Yeah. And when we study risks, it's really fun because we have things like triggers. We don't have things like triggers with issues. We have things like assessment and prioritization, qualitative risk analysis. So we can actually be monitoring towards risks, and we have a fairly high confidence that we can respond to it appropriately. But it's these issues, and many issues start off as previously unidentified risks that if we were sort of aware, or if we were a little more experienced, or if we had that right contact, it would have been an issue. I find risks a lot easier to manage than issues.
Well, yeah, because the issues are staring you in the face, preventing you from moving forward. They've already impacted you to some degree, and they are front and center. So you have to deal with them. Whereas the risks, I see this as something kind of in my periphery that I've always got there. I'm always watching. My focus is still on the project.
Exactly. I can sit back in my chair and look at the ceiling and work through my risks. I grit my teeth and I'm working directly with people and constantly on my guard when I'm dealing with an issue.
So I recently had an experience where I identified a risk that I had seen prop up on many projects, and it looked like the beginnings of that risk were starting to show on this project. So I brought it forward, and the risk manager said, "No, we're not going to document that yet. We don't know yet if it's going to be a risk.
If it's going to be."
And I'm trying to think, you're the risk manager. I'm bringing something up that could happen. Just because I don't know if it will happen doesn't mean I shouldn't be documenting today.
And if you look at structure and delivery and the wording that you gave me, you're actually saying that we're not going to deal with it as a risk. We're going to deal with it as an issue.
Yeah.
Basically an unplanned risk. Yep.
Yeah.
Congratulations to human behavior.
Yeah. Let's not document and monitor something that, I don't see
happen.
But let me tell you, risks, you also mentioned before something about risk can also be opportunities.
Mm-hmm.
And I recall this situation I had. I was working on a project, managing one for a state client. And I began to notice some behavioral oddities in my database architect. I had one database architect. She was key to the project in terms of where we are in the whole DD&I approach. And these oddities began to sort of show up more and more, to the point where I didn't know if it was going to be an HR problem or how I should deal with it. So I called my superiors and said, I want to put this risk on the table. I don't want to make it visible to my team. I want to make it visible to my management, that we could lose a database architect during some instability issues. Can you help me with that? And so my manager identified another database architect who he could pull from a different project and walk into this one should that occur. Well, a couple months later, it did occur. She had a nervous breakdown. She had to leave the project, forced with healthcare, and we were able to bring in this new person. So where I'm going with this is the first part was identifying the risk the minute that I sort of noticed something, but also carefully dealing with it so that I could still respect the person. But here's where the risk turned into opportunity. The database architect that was installed in her place was far superior, had just come up for a similar project, had already seen some of the challenges we were seeing, was able to hit them front and center, and we accelerated on that project. So my risk that could have become an issue suddenly became an opportunity. Do we actually advance the project more quickly?
Yes, yes. I talk about this in my classes. When we start working with the human component of projects, it's amazing how resilient and how creative humans can be if you give them the opportunity.
Creative is correct. I noticed you said when we start working with the human factors. I'm not sure we ever don't work with the human factors on a
Yeah,
project.
yeah, but consciously and aggressively. Yeah.
I have another question for you, Tim. Kind of along this line. I think we've kind of established risks versus issues, negative risk, which we tend to think of as negative, but that there are also potential opportunities with risk. But I'm on an agile project right now, and they keep throwing around terms called like impediments or blockers, or what was the other term? Obstacles.
Right.
And using those terms, how do I relate those to the concept of risk and issue?
Well, actually, impediments, obstacles, and blockers are different grade of issues. You know how you prioritize risk, like low, medium, and high, or green, yellow, and red with your risk? You can do the same thing with issues. And we look at obstacles as those low issues. Basically, I can go around them, I can go over them, I can go through them, but they are issues. They are something standing in the way. And then the next level up are impediments, things that can slow me down. They'll drag me back, but I can continue work while I'm still dealing with them. And then blockers are the showstoppers. That's where you get work stoppage. Now, number one, you have priority. Number two, you have a communication tool that you can actually say, this is why we're dealing with this issue here. This is a showstopper, guys. We're not going to deal with the obstacles or impediments. We're dealing with our blockers, and then we'll look at our impediments. And this actually gives you an opportunity to treat issues in the same manner you treat risks. You have the prioritization, you have the assessment, you have the communication tools, and it becomes very, very effective.
So, on the project that I'm on right now, one of the risks that was identified a little while ago was the fact that COVID was becoming more prevalent again. So, am I still dealing with a risk? I'm not yet at an obstacle or an impediment or a blocker because it hasn't hit my team yet, correct?
Is if it's not, well, here's the thing. If it is, it may only be an obstacle where we can actually raise it and we can actually put the things we used to have in place, and it doesn't slow down the work.
Okay, I got you.
And
As it,
yeah, exactly. And if it is slowing down work, or if there's work stoppage, that's where we get into our yellows and reds.
yeah, and as it turned out, the risk became relevant because one of the key staff did, in fact, come down with COVID. So that person's tasks were delayed for a couple of weeks. Now, the entire project rallied around and worked on other issues until that person came back. I shouldn't say other issues. I don't want to complicate it. Worked on other tasks until this person was well enough to come back. So the overall project didn't slow down, but that particular work stream did, in fact, suffer because of that person's absence.
Right. And so this is, again, it's a very small concept. It doesn't change any definitions, but it adds an opportunity for us to actually manage risks in a more knowledgeable manner.
Yeah, and I think the other thing that we should talk about a little bit, or at least mention, is the fact that people don't always look at sort of the greater range of possible things that could delay projects or create impediments for projects. Things like scarcity of skills suddenly, or perhaps we have supplier problems, or perhaps management is putting too much pressure on the project team and it's causing some stress and anxiety. So I think there's other things that we should, as project managers, be aware of that could begin to hamper the progress of our team and therefore should be called out as potentially impediments, potentially obstacles, potentially blockers if they're serious.
Yeah, exactly. And the nice thing is, as a project manager, we can facilitate this discussion and pull everybody's wisdom together. And then we can actually work with everybody to make sure that things are in place so it doesn't slow them down.
Yeah.
And this is the beautiful thing. Agile and traditional project management is starting to talk about this too. There's this concept of mindset called flow. As long as the work is progressing, we're not in trouble per se. It may not be as good as we want, but it's still moving forward. And that's where the issues as blockers and impediments become really critical.
So in terms of looking at the priority, the severity levels of all of these things that we've been talking about, what's your concept of prioritizing, reprioritizing? Do you formalize that? How do you handle those on projects?
Yes.
Yes.
I have very religious schedule I adhere to when I have a project that's quote unquote in flight. I have my Monday routine. I have my week routine. I have my daily routine. I have my Friday routine. Here's where I do my human factors work. Here's how I do my data analysis. And I'm working with my various data analysts. And then here's where I'm touching my issues. And one of the things I do is I commit to opening up my issue log and my risk register every day. And when I open them up, either in the morning or in the afternoon, I say, okay, I'm going to change something here. Something is going to change. So it causes me to heighten my scrutiny and look at all the possible changes to the issues and the risks that I'm looking at.
I wish I was as disciplined as that in my own project management process.
You go ahead. Go ahead.
No, but yeah, you know what? I think in many ways, over the years, I've learned to do many of the things that you just talked about almost unconsciously. It's
Yeah,
almost like you develop that sixth sense.
yeah. When you have what's riding with you on your shoulders, you naturally acclimatize yourself to this. This I got from handling 10 to $30 million projects. And being a scientist of business, I said, you know what? Number one, I have to have a baseline set of processes. And number two, how can I, as I do this on a regular basis, how can I refine it? I started this back in 2005. I've been working on my own since 2012. I've been, for 10 years now. I've been solo. So I don't have any net under my trapeze. So I'm sort of committed to this.
Yeah, and it's funny. I used to get a lot of grief from my own management as a project manager, myself as a project manager. They say, "Why are you by yourself writing that project status report every week for our client? Why don't you delegate that out to your team leads and to your other personnel that could use the practice?" And in some ways, I was being very selfish. I hated writing the project minute because some of these project status reports became 50 and 60 pages long on a weekly basis. But what I found was when I took the time to bring in the data from all of my teams, listed in some sort of consumable order that my client can digest easily, I found my own thinking became much more clarifying. And, we talked about prioritizing, reprioritizing, that sort of thing. It's amazing how when yeah, I forgot about that. Let me write this down. And as you go through the status report itself, it's amazing how that jogs the memory bank so that issues and obstacles and blockers and risks don't fall through the cracks. So yeah, it was a little selfish on my part. Perhaps I should have been delegating more of that to my team leads, but I had much more hands-on for my projects just through that stupid little status report.
So what I did was I made the experts, my team and stakeholders, responsible for a piece of the dashboard. And they had their own real estate on the dashboard. And it was my job to synthesize that and give the big picture, sort of like a narrative summary, where it said, okay, here's the variances from last week. This is what we're paying attention to. And it gave me an opportunity that when I started looking at the pieces of the dashboard that changed, I can reach out and say why, and that fills in the gaps. And it was my job not to actually create these individual reports, but stitch them together in the big picture.
And to make sure they read with one voice and then make sure that they were digestible by your client. Yeah. I had done that, and maybe I'm too much of a perfectionist, but I noticed that my technical team leads, for example, would write in such a way that if I presented this to the CIO or this client's project manager, they would be scratching their heads as to what all of this jargon meant.
Communications. It
Yeah.
is a huge hurdle.
Yeah.
And creating a document that's formal enough to be structured that you can find what you need quickly, yet not so formal that people get lost in the structure is an art.
Yeah.
Art.
So how do you formally track risks and issues and that sort of thing with your team?
I have a risk register. I have a risk issue log, and we have prioritization, and they flow up and down. I prioritize just like a Pareto with my top ones on there. And then the top 3 to top 5 are moved over on a maybe a biweekly, twice a week basis. They're moved over to the dashboard. And then everybody working on the project and every critical stakeholder has a view of the dashboard, so they can ask questions. But then I get to actually culminate the report at the end of the week that says, here's what happened, here's where we are now, and here's where we expect to be going next week.
And do you, in that process, do you do a formal review with your own team before you present it to the client or to your management?
I don't show the report to the team before I send it out to the management. Now that gives me food for thought. What happens if I give them authority to rewrite a piece of this? And I'd be interested in seeing this, as long as they have the vision that I have across, the whole project. I have no problem with that.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
No, what I've done is very, very similar to what you just talked about, but to take that risk register or the issues report and sit down with my leads and go through one by one and say, is this still stated correctly? This is the status as of 2 weeks ago or last week. Is it still stated correctly? Should we increase the severity of it, or should we decrease it? Has it gone from a high to a low, perhaps because of an action that was taken? And so that way I also got input from my team leads who may have been working on something without my knowledge, but had already taken care of something. So in that way, when I presented the report to my client and to my senior management, I had the input from all of my leads so that I knew without a doubt that these risks were each being looked at during the week.
And that's brilliant, because number one, you're not making your leads wrong. You're not showing them up in a public document where somebody says, oh, that's not what I know. But you're actually allowing them in a very friendly and very collaborative manner to go back and check their history and check their knowledge and validate. This is beautiful.
And the other things that I've learned to do too are I'm sure you do this as well. You have probably a morning stand-up, 15, 20-minute stand-up. We encourage any of our staff, not just the leads, but any staff, to bring forward blockers, obviously. Reporting what they've done yesterday, what they're going to do today, what's blocking them. And sometimes out of the blocker discussion comes a risk that gets added to the risk register. And so we're, constantly kind of measuring and monitoring and just always have an eye on what's happening with every single person on the project. in terms of is there anything that's impeding progress?
That's beautiful. Yeah. And that's beautiful. One of the other things I initiated a long time ago was 15 minutes a week with individuals, as long as my projects are below 20 to 25 people. 15 minutes a week, one-on-one. And that's where I can actually pull up my risk register and issue log and say, okay, let's go through what are the things that you're committed to here. And also their work assignments, their roles and responsibilities. And just give them that opportunity to query. Most of my projects have 50 workers on them or below. So it's not difficult to assign myself 15 minutes, even if it's just, finding 15 minutes to sit down in a cafeteria, as long as I have time to do my homework.
Yeah. And you could even do it at the team level and just make sure everybody has input, right?
There you go. There you go. And give them time to do their homework. I've neglected that a couple times, and I've made people feel comfortable because they felt rushed, and it was all my fault.
Yeah. The other thing that it just occurred to me during that stand up is people report things that are impeding their progress. And if something does become a actionable item or a risk, we do assign it to someone, because often someone will come up, and I've seen this on so many projects. Something will be going on, something will be impeding the project, and everybody will know about it, but then it doesn't get assigned to anyone to get taken care of. So
Right.
you have your stand up the next day, and guess what? The issue or the impediment is still there.
And that's a good detail to put in the team charter, where ownership of issues and risks. And I've found that people are not comfortable owning issues because they may not have the authority to resolve them. And a little discussion at the beginning of each project can actually alleviate that fear and say, look, I'm not asking you to solve that issue by yourself. I'm asking you to be the communicator and advisor and
Yeah.
escalate it.
That is so important, because a lot of times someone's name will get tagged with an issue. It's not to solve the issue, it's to run it down.
Yes, exactly. And that is it. Get the issue so tired that it gives. But yeah, that's exactly what the intention is. And assignment, responsibility, accountability does not mean, we work on isolation. This is our fear as a project manager. I'm responsible for this project. Yeah, you're responsible for reaching out when you get in deep water, and you need a hand too. And so this is the advice we have in larger projects that we have for ourselves and for the people who report into us. You're not solving the problem, but you're just holding on to its hand and telling us what you need when you need it, so we can work together to resolve it.
Well, it's similar to the example that I had used a few minutes ago in terms of the database architect that was exhibiting weird behaviors. I could not replace, because in the company that I worked for, I, as project manager, did not have the authority to replace that person just because I noticed something different. However, I had the authority to deal with that as a risk and to make sure that the right people were notified. And then the right person, my senior vice president, had the authority to make that replacement once we saw that it was warranted.
Right.
So again, I was responsible to monitor the risk, but I did not have the authority to resolve the risk. Someone else did.
Yeah, within ethical behavior and within business code, you have a lot of latitude as a project manager, and that's the beautiful part of the role. And again, turning that around and giving that gift to the people around you makes them feel a lot more comfortable. And second of all, it gives them a little bit of control, like they get to actually have a voice at the table. And thirdly, it gives them opportunity to stretch and try things out. And it gives them a chance to actually show their chops in managing a piece of the project.
And a lot of times when we talk about risks, staff tend to immediately, for some reason, go to the fact that we have to fix this. We have to mitigate this. As I see the risk approaching, and maybe it's becoming less tolerable, maybe it's becoming more likelihood, somehow I have to mitigate it. But there are other opportunities for handling risks, aren't there? Besides just mitigation.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. There's five very well defined and documented responses. And one of them is do nothing, except we can change the project. We can hand the risk over to somebody else or bring somebody else in. We can mitigate, which is minimize, or we can accept it or escalate it. And the beautiful thing is with mitigation, you don't necessarily get rid of the risk, and you have this residual and secondary stuff that you have to worry about. And with these other tools and mechanisms, sometimes you can get rid of the whole risk.
Yeah, I remember a couple projects, well, several projects. A lot of the projects I worked on dealt with interface trading partners,
Mhm.
and a lot of times the department that I worked for, its sister organization, there was data that had to be traded, but the priorities in terms of creating that interface between the two systems were not the same. Ours was based on a schedule, get it done. Theirs was based on a maintenance schedule, and it's not our priority. So often, for example, we would take on the risk of making sure that interface worked when we couldn't really require our business partner to do their part in making that interface work. And so often in those situations, we would just transfer it upstairs because we were the sister organization of the others. The two of us served the same constituents, so therefore we should be working together. So by transferring the responsibility for that risk upstairs to people who had clout over both organizations, we were able to resolve the risk very quickly. So people should think in terms of it's not just mitigation, but there's other ways of dealing with risks.
Exactly. And again, this is why formal training in project management is so valuable. This stuff we're talking about on this show is tried and true, and it's been in place for almost 50 years. This is how you manage this stuff, and it works pretty well.
What did they do before we formalized all of this, though? I
Uh,
think people had lists. Right?
And well, not only that, but you had tribal knowledge. You
Yeah.
had really good people who figured this out on their own, and they were good-hearted and captured it and shared it. And that's where the Project Management Institute came from, out of the 40s and 50s, and all the work that the military demanded, the Coast Guard and the Navy mostly. And let's actually get this into a framework that we can actually pass on. And so that's where project management and the concept of projects finally really started taking off.
I still don't know how they did it without Excel, though. If I didn't have
Oh
Excel,
boy.
I would be working 15, 18 hours every day, 7 days a week. So
I remember VisiCalc and the advent of VisiCalc. And being in IT, I had to be working on big IBM mainframes with DB2. And that was a struggle because you had to have the picture in your head and you couldn't graphically represent it. VisiCalc has literally changed not just the way we work in our jobs, but all of business.
yeah, so much. So that's such a healthier way, such a healthier approach to monitoring these things. And of course, after Excel came all of these um, project management tools that managed your risks, manage your action items and your decisions and all that sort of thing in a single tool. So that by filtering on something quickly that's available to the entire team, it
Well,
becomes much more visible.
and not only that, but you have conditional formatting, which when I discovered that, I said, where were you my entire life? Let me buy you a dinner. Where you have people contributing, like I said, to blocks on an Excel spreadsheet, and those numbers are aggregated, and the output of that number can change its color based on its value. And I'm thinking, wow,
Yeah.
this is something that is a real treat, because first of all, it shows where your risks are going. Second of all, it shows where your issues are.
Yeah, it's interesting how when I present a status report to my client, they always go for the red parts of the status report first.
Isn't that interesting? Yeah, for good reason.
For good reason. So I think we've talked a lot about risks and risk management and that sort of thing. What kind of shall we say early warning type signs or early warning type systems do you use when you handle issues?
There's only two mechanisms that I really have. And early warning systems for issues are risks themselves. I decided to declare risk as an early warning system. After my experience with what I explained and then doing that, my formality and risk analysis jumped through the roof. And so my risk and my issues almost became complementary, like two sides of the same coin, right? And then with my risks, I may not have a response, but I do. I mean, my issues, I may not have a response per se, but I usually do have a workaround. A temporary fix that I have out my back pocket. And so after working in like 12 different industries and with 35 different major sets of technology, I have a good, good list of workarounds, and then my human factor workarounds too. I just have those in my back pocket.
Yeah, I find if I pay attention, now I'm getting much more tactful here than your explanation, but I find that when I'm on a project, if I truly pay attention once or twice or even three times a week, very specifically at the task level of my project schedule, and I'm talking project schedules that are sometimes 10,000 tasks deep.
Mhm.
But if I'm looking at some of these, and I'm looking at very carefully in terms of where I am and bringing in some thresholds as I do my analysis, you get after as a project manager, you get a pretty decent gut feel for when something is beginning to slow down too much. So if I have a developer who's a day behind on a 20-day task, I'm not concerned. If I have a developer who's a day behind on a 6-day task, I'm getting concerned. So I think that some of my early warning signs are also me diligently digging in to the tools that I have made available to myself and my team that give me those early warning signs.
Exactly, exactly. And you define your thresholds when you do your risk assessment, right?
Yes.
Okay. And what's really interesting is even when those risks turn to issues, you still have your thresholds.
You do. Yeah. Those don't go away.
So basically, you have a way to manage ongoing your issues, even if they don't go away. And if they basically go down, they may even be you may even be able to change your response. And I remember thinking about this one night, and I was thinking to myself, hey, I can actually do nothing on this issue. I can accept that issue, and all of a sudden it becomes a risk. And it goes back on my risk register. But if I'm really good keeping my risk register and my issue log up to date, may go back from being a risk back to being an issue. And so this is where I say it's, managing my risks and my issues in complementary manners actually assists me in not just prioritization, but understanding the full context. What is my overarching project risk? What's my overarching picture of issues? And that's a very powerful tool to have with you as a project manager.
You know, what's interesting too is you also have to be responsive to your customer's risk tolerance. Sometimes your early warning sign gets triggered much later than your customers does because they have a much lower tolerance of that any available or any upcoming risk.
Tolerance is really important.
Yeah.
Acceptance, appetite. Appetite's important too. With a risk, they may be willing to carry that negative risk a lot more if there's some chance for reward. And then the threshold, understanding that line above which you got to do further analysis and keep looking at it, and below which you have to just accept and keep monitoring and changing the numbers.
Yeah. And I found I've had a lot of government projects, and government tends to be less risk tolerant by nature, and as it should be because they're dealing with public money. So a lot of those, I tend to understand that my risk tolerance is a lot higher than my client's risk tolerance. But I tell you, there's been a couple times when I worked with a CIO that came from industry into government, and they had a much higher tolerance for risk. So that in those cases, the project took off much quicker because they would allow that sort of thing to move forward much faster. So again, you have to know your clients, you have to know your staff, you have to know your project, you have to know yourself.
We're getting back to the human component.
Yeah.
This is not my threshold.
Right.
This is my project threshold. This is my sponsors and my customers and clients threshold. And we have to treat it as such. We're stewards. We're not owners of the project.
So if we're stewards, what are some healthy issues management habits that we can help our listeners understand that they can employ starting? I mean, the minute they shut off this podcast and go back to their project site, what are some healthy issues management habits that we can begin to employ immediately?
Build a regular schedule of analysis and interaction and engagement. Turn that into muscle memory. Again, Monday morning, what am I doing? Tuesday morning, what am I doing? What am I doing this week, next week? What am I doing beginning and end of month? Turn that into a scheduled habit. And that you don't have to think about it anymore. Make it simple. And then second of all, ethics, the whole ethical component. If you look into the code of ethics over at PMI, they connect urgency with issues, and we raise issues at their source quickly and efficiently. And we don't resolve people, resolve issues. There's always a sense of urgency. I neglected that a couple times very early in my project management career, and that taught me, just like a hot stove teaches everybody.
Yeah. The thing that I found, and maybe it's because I've spent so much time honing my communication craft. The thing that I found is it's fairly easy to identify an issue. Sometimes it's difficult to put it in words that are succinct and absolutely describe the nature of the issue. And once you learn how to do that, such that people go, aha, that is a problem. We need to take care of it. And not only just to develop that good process to identify and describe, but also develop a good process to identify and categorize the potential impact of that issue or of that risk, but probably the issue itself. So
that's how important communications is on all of our project work. Understanding the value of the interpretation. The analysis is one thing, but analysis without the ability to share it with anybody, it's turning that tacit knowledge, that muscle memory, into something explicit so that people understand, this is this is a little bit of smoke over here. This is a fire.
yes,
Your hand in the smoke here, put your hand in the fire here. This is what we're talking about. And the ability to articulate that without going through the actual words is an incredible skill.
Well, and to me, there's almost nothing more embarrassing than to have the person leading the risk review or the issues review meeting and say, who wrote this one? What did you mean by this? If the person has to ask what you mean by this, you have failed your entire team in terms of describing that issue and its urgency.
Understanding of the answer before you ask the question, being proactive as a project manager. If you go into a meeting and the information is not available to you, um, number one, that's a sin. And number two, if you don't have time to think it through, especially with like you said, tens of thousands of task projects, you can't go into a meeting unprepared.
Right. And especially thinking it through. What you said was so important. The whole idea of being proactive, because issues and even risks, as they get closer to becoming true issues, they require action. People feel so, and I've seen this so often. People feel I've documented it. Is it pretty? But if they don't take action, it's impact you negatively. So
yeah, it's the difference between a philosopher who writes good paragraph and a philosopher that lives a good life. It's the same thing. I bottomed out on this in my mid-50s. I decided a great, well-written report is wonderful, but action is what makes a successful project.
no, that is so. That's almost tweetable, Tim.
I have sent that out. I've said it's nice to be a Seneca with his great paragraphs, but it's better to be an Epictetus with his good action, or Aurelius. And it's the same thing. It's the same. You know what? You have something there. Let's continue these discussions.
Well, and the other thing I think in terms of having a healthy issues management habit, one is to understand that you are not the omniscient one. You have a team around you for a reason. And a lot of times brainstorming potential actions to deal with an issue or a coming risk, that takes brainstorming, that takes the power of many minds. And sometimes you end up with one action to resolve, or sometimes you end up with several parallel actions to resolve. But certainly bringing on other people's ideas in addition to your own makes for a much easier ability to deal with it. Plus, then everybody is committed to dealing with that issue or risk.
See, that's exactly right. And early in our careers, and this is getting into, how do I actually grow in my career? Early in our careers, we think that there's two ways to handle problems. Roll up my sleeves and I do it, or I blame somebody else and it's their fault.
Yeah.
And there's actually a middle way, a third way that says, let me get ahead of it and let me pull in people smarter than me so we can create basically a wave of action so this issue doesn't get us in trouble.
That's pretty fascinating stuff. And I think you and I can talk about it so easily because we've lived it.
Oh boy. And for every one thing I've learned doing it right and capturing it, I've learned 5 things by dropping the ball and making my mistakes and doing everything that I've seen my students do and think. And it's like, I have so much more tolerance as I've gotten older for people, but at the same time, I've also have grown a lot more of a proactive behavior. And that's what's actually made me advance my career. It's being proactive and being approachable and being effective in my professional relationships.
And I think being proactive also being proactive with the available facts in hand, as opposed to just the sky is falling proactivity.
Yes. Go to your sponsor with questions. Go to your sponsor with advice. Always be the advice person, which means you're going to be doing your homework before everybody does. You know what the problem is before everybody does. And that means that you don't do the homework, but you ensure the good homework is done so you can actually put the pieces together.
Yeah. Oh, that is so important. That has saved my bacon so many times by doing the homework in advance and making sure that when I spoke up in a meeting or wrote something in an email, my facts were solid.
Yeah.
Nothing worse than putting something in writing based on an assumption or based on hearsay or a hallway conversation until you have checked it out and made sure that those were true facts.
You know, I learned that in my work in project management, but that learning was so reinforced in the classroom because the way I presented material and the creative nature of humans taught me that if I am not explicit in the way I describe things and articulate and present the logic and the emotion, um, it's effective.
No, that's true. All right. Have we beat this topic up pretty well? Risks,
We
issues,
have
impediments,
we have
blockers.
done really well, and I appreciate your insight into this. Again, you know, your experience and your knowledge together have actually built a really good communicable foundation on how we can approach issues management. It's again, it's a mechanical part that has a huge human component in it. And you did it really well.
Well, and it's important whether you're working on a simple project or a large project or a complex project or which it's important for any kind of project. And maybe that's how we could leave today's topic. We've got a couple minutes yet, but maybe that's something that we can suggest. Do we have any other recommendations for our young project management listeners in terms of getting them interested or getting them uh, scaled up to get into some more complex critical projects?
Yes, here is my advice. There are no small projects. Each project is a business decision, and each project, someone somewhere committed headcount and physical resources and time to you to get something done. There's a business reason, and that business reason is to create more value than it was. Now, if we're on small projects, we have an opportunity to learn and grow managing around issues and risks and other components of project management. And that is setting the stage for the next part of your career. Do this right, do this well, build your habits right now, and that will launch you into that. People do notice these type of things.
Okay. I'm going to use an American sports analogy. So hopefully our international listeners will forgive me, but a very famous coach called Vince Lombardi would go to his professional football team and hold up a football and say, "This is a football." Saying this to people who are earning millions playing football, he's saying, "This is a football." So I think one of the things, just as you said, is to use whatever project it is, but become so familiar with the basics that they are second nature, that even a reminder of this is a football just brings those basics to mind so that you can work with those as your foundation to move forward in terms of developing your skills.
And it's all fundamentals. We're not talking, there's no advanced secrets or mysteries in projects once you start getting into those 10 and $100 million projects and above.
Okay.
There's no advance. It's all fundamentals. You get it right now, you just keep on doing it right and continue to improve, and the work comes to you.
Yeah, the other thing I've learned, and a lot of our listeners will learn this maybe by the seat of their pants, but we should also treat every project as unique and different. I remember coming up, successful project, huge profit margins, happy client, walked into another situation where I'm now feeling confident because of the incredible victory I just had. So within a few months was pulling my hair out because I had a different client who was less tolerant of any kind of change. I had a team that was less experienced. I had technology that was less versatile than the one I just come from. So yes, treat every single project uniquely, indifferently, and give it your all whenever you get on a new project. And as you said, stick to those fundamentals and build on those.
That's great. That's great. So where can we find you this week? Are you going to be tied up in front of a computer or with your clients, or will you be out on the internet a little bit?
I'm usually on the internet. I probably spend 15, 20 minutes a day on things like LinkedIn and that sort of thing. So that as topics capture my interest, I may spend a little more time, but LinkedIn under my name or under the name of my company, People First Project Management.
Excellent. And I'm going to be out on LinkedIn. I've committed to spending more time with my constituents out on LinkedIn. So if you've sent a request to connect, or if you have something to say, I will be interacting with you on there and other public forums.
Excellent. And as usual, I can hardly wait to hear what we have to say next week.
Oh yeah, I'm sure it's going to be fun. Well, thanks again for the opportunity. And thank you, everybody tuning in. And if you have a special interest or concern, use the comments. Otherwise, we'll talk to you again next week.
You bet. We'll see ya.
Thanks again, Merv.